All right. So our next block after Thanksgiving break is going to be organic chemistry. And in the Waldorf curriculum, the science is really built up in this living way where we are really focused on phenomenological science and developing observation in the students. Through the observation in the younger years in particular, we're really helping the children to foster the sense of wonder for the natural world, but also developing their own thinking instead of looking always at the reason why and starting with the why. We are hoping to encourage the students to get there to the why on their own through their observations and through their thinking processes. So, this aspect of developing the imagination and developing the memory is ultimately um, helping the students to develop thinking, helping them to develop pure thinking, which we've talked about before. Now, in seventh grade, the students have done some inorganic chemistry where they're looking at these changes of state that happen in the inorganic world. And the eighth grade organic chemistry that we do is focused mostly on plant and food science. Um, Rudolf Steiner gives the topics for the eighth grade chemistry to be the production and character of substances that are built up in living bodies. So, starches, sugar, proteins, and fats. Now, in seventh grade, this starts to come in the nutrition that the students are studying. And also in eighth grade, we continue talking about anatomy and some of the structures of the human muscles and bones. So, with everything, of course, we're trying to tie in this relationship of the human to nature, to the living world, and bring this um, a really human quality to the science so that it's not so much something that's outside of us, because of course it's not, but sometimes that has a tendency to happen if we're just memorizing formulas and looking at converting the different elements and all of that. Instead, trying to get the students to really feel this understanding of the connection between our bodies and the plants and how all of these changes that are happening chemically are happening also in plants and in humans and in other living organisms. So um this the focus for kind of the broader focus is helping this understanding of the processes that transform plants into substances that our bodies use. So how foods transform into their individual components of sugars and starches and proteins. Um, and these processes happen in the plant form. So the first thing that we'll be studying is looking at a seed and how a seed goes through the germination process and turns into a plant, and seeing how there is that chemical change that's happening in a seed. Um, so that's happening in the natural world, but it's also happening in our bodies through digestion and all of those things. So we are doing experiments that are helping the students to see these transformations that are happening. And sometimes they seem like they're kind of just cooking experiments, but really the goal of the experiments are to help see how this transformation is happening. That transformation is really the key. Now, I know that the lists for the science is always really a sticking point and is usually the most challenging thing in this format, and as a teacher is also the most challenging, is gathering together supplies and making sure you have what you need. Um, the most important thing for me and for the students is that they're able to experience the changes. If you're not able to access the chemicals to test for the changes, that is, for the students, it's more exciting because they can see how chemically these things have changed, but they don't have to have the chemicals. It's real, they are still able to see the transformation through the cooking and through the reducing of sugars and all of the other things that we'll be doing during this block. So that is to say, um, the key to help your student with is to help them see the changes that are taking place in the activities that we're doing. Now, I know that most eighth graders are wanting to be much more independent with their lessons and probably aren't going to want you to be all that involved with everything, which is fine and great. They're created for the students to be able to do independently. But one of the most challenging things in our modern world in particular is for the students to develop peer observation without trying to immediately find the answer. And often they are led to thinking about the answer of why it happens before they're really observing what happened. So we get to that answer, but if that answer taints their observations, it makes it very challenging for them to truly understand the transformations that are happening. So what would be most helpful for your child is that you are helping them to develop that observation and that questioning, even if it's just a conversation that you're having at dinner of asking them what they did and then making sure that you're asking them to describe the process of what happened. And I know that eighth graders can be kind of not want to talk too much about their day, but that can be something, oh, well, this is what we have to do for school or however it works with your child, but making sure that they are thinking through and talking about their observations is something that is challenging for me to do in this format. And it's going to really help their learning if they are required to do that process of speaking through their observations and coming to the conclusion through their observations. Let's see. So, and in order for that questioning and that process to happen, it's not that you necessarily need to know what they did. To start with, it's more about them having to think through and visualize in their mind's eye, to have to go back and recall the steps of what they did and have to go back and think through what they actually saw and smelt and tasted and all those things. Let's see. Yeah, so as far as the chemicals that we're using for this block, so for example, we are doing many experiments where we are seeing different foods transform into sugars, simple sugars. And so we have Benedict's solution to test for simple sugars in these different foods. Now, they don't have to use the Benedict solution to be able to still see the process of transformation that's happening visually. But the solution tests are really going to help them gain this understanding of this being a chemical process, of this being real science. For some of the students, it's harder for them to get that connection of this being real science if we're just making candy or something like that. And the eighth graders are really ready for this greater conceptual knowledge and meeting them with this need for the more abstract concepts while still supporting this phenomenological understanding of science and bringing an understanding of science through the process of observation. Those things will help them. The chemicals that we're using, none of them are going to be highly toxic. None of them should get in your eyes or anything like that, but they're not something that you have to be overly worried about the students coming into contact with. Of course, I do speak with them about using gloves and always eye gear because the eyes, of course, are more sensitive organs. They also should have properly ventilated space for many of these experiments. So that is something that they will need, of course, proper fire safety and making sure they're in a properly ventilated space will be important to keep an eye on, depending on your child and how aware they are of these things. I think I would have more of a conversation with some of them than with others. But generally, none of them should be dangerous as long as the students are careful with everything and are in a properly ventilated space with fresh air. And I will talk about that with them in the lessons, but also supporting it at home will be important. Okay, so I had a quote from an article that I read about chemistry in general, and its effect. We are now at a turning point in history. There was a historical necessity for thinking to pass through the stage of materialism, but this nadir has been reached, and some of the symptoms are apathy and incidences of violence in our schools. The quality of empathy is the process of being snuffed out like a candle flame, and this leads to apathy or indifference, which is the enemy of education. The antidote for apathy is the cultivation of empathy and gratitude, while allowing students to experience the wonder within the natural world. Gratitude focuses one outwardly. Ingratitude causes estrangement. It cuts one off from the world. The new millennium is desperate for novel ideas about teaching of science. The souls of youth ask to be kindled with creative passion. Gratitude is the internal disposition to see the wonder of the world about us, to recognize good things as bounty bestowed, and to delight in the beauty and goodness of things given. Empathy allows an individual to merge with others experiencing their experiences and founding new community. Gratitude is both a spur to learning and a byproduct of it. The intellectual journey begins exactly where the virtue of gratitude begins, in wonder. Wonder at the unknown, awe-filled appreciation of the mysteries that surround us. Older students' wonder is, why does that music lift my heart and spirit? Why does a painting touch me to the inner core of my being? Teachers need to fan this spark of wonder by providing the student with knowledge. The students need to engage in participatory science. Discovering concepts does not extinguish wonder, but rather fuels it, intensifies it, and elevates it to a new level. So this requires a combination of kindling the sparks of imagination, quieting the soul so inspiration can be heard, and presenting intellectual material so that intuitive truths can be experienced. When we do this, we attend to both content and character. We help students move from apathy to wonder, from wonder to knowing, and from knowing to gratitude. So this aspect of helping to develop curiosity and wonder is extremely important and a little bit more challenging in the older students, but not impossible and actually quite present. So really helping the students not to get too wrapped up in, like I said at the beginning, this wanting to immediately know the root cause is really that knowledge is so easily accessible for us these days as far as conclusions. Everyone can Google why things happen so easily, but reaching the process of why and helping that to develop within oneself is going to create a much deeper understanding and also help to foster this wonder and not be led to that point of apathy and thinking that everything is just overwhelming and boring. So, that being said, it is important. I do present a lot of things in this block, and there's a whole range of things, way more things that you could do with organic chemistry. It's, of course, with everything. Um, but this preserving of interest and excitement and wonder is much more important to me and to the students' developing of their intellectual capacities than getting through everything. So they should have a nice balance of feeling intellectually stimulated while not feeling overwhelmed. And this is once again encouraging that each student is different and each student will also need to approach the curriculum in a different way. So if things are feeling like too much, I'd rather have them do one thing out of two things and really be able to delve into that and be able to experience that wonder without having to worry that they're falling behind. So please do reach out if adjustments need to be made. Yeah. um, let's see. Yeah, so the observational skills and helping them to develop that, it seems kind of basic, but it's really challenging for some students. I've found in the past that some students really struggle with this idea of, like, say we're outside watching the geese and we're making observations on the geese, and what can you actually see? They're gray. What sounds do they make? And immediately some of them want to go to, oh, they're migrating south in the winter, right? But that's not actually something that you can see happening. Maybe you could see, oh, that they stopped here and they weren't here yesterday and they're continuing to fly. But this idea of always wanting to bring this conclusion into observations is something that is really hard for the students to tease apart. Um, and of course, we want to get to the conclusions eventually, but we don't want that to taint our ability to see what we see, to observe what we see. Yeah, so developing that independent thinking happens through their ability to really be able to see what they see and think what they think independently of all of the noise of the outside, telling them what they see and telling them what the answer is. And that's really hard sometimes to stop that from coming in, especially in science, I think. All right, I think that's all I wanted to say about this. So we're going through a little bit of plant science and sugars and transformation of plants into sugars and into starches and fibers. Cellulose we'll talk a little bit about, and then talk a bit about proteins and about fats as well. So there's lots of experiments that will be cooking experiments, as well as looking at the specific qualities of these different food compounds and discussing a little bit about how the body transforms these once it gets into our systems and how also plants are creating these different compounds. So doing so much in 3 short weeks. All right, any questions that you think would be good for everyone? I know I kind of rambled a bit, but okay. Okay, thank you.